out. And I don't think, or at least I'm skeptical at this point, that you're going to be able to pay for that on the back only of a certain portion of the population. Because let's not forget, we're not only talking in the Biden proposal about taxing the wealthy and corporations, we're talking about cutting taxes on people who are in the lower classes. So you combine those two things, how you pay for that, very, very tough to do. And I think we're still waiting to see those scores to see if this thing can work out. I don't think that's been addressed yet. When we looked at the capital gains tax increase he's talking about, there is a school of thought which says that actually decreases the amount of revenue that they're going to take in. So that's going to be a big issue going forward for the Biden administration.
Because people just don't sell stuff if they have to pay taxes on it. That's what some people say. Okay, delighted to say that our contributors Jeannie Shan-Zeno and Rick Davis will be staying with us throughout the evening. For the view from the Biden administration, we now welcome Bloomberg White House correspondent Mario Parker, who is tonight on Capitol Hill, of course. So, Mario, what is the president trying to accomplish tonight? What's his #1 goal?
The #1 goal is to convince Americans that big government is back and that big government can work for them. Americans have showed a lot of distrust over the years in terms of how government can affect their lives. President Biden is trying to make the case that government can indeed affect their lives and work for them, whether it's the infrastructure plan that he's built over the last few weeks, this families plan that he's coming out with to ensure free community college and child care, and then even going back to the stimulus checks a couple of months ago as well. The president is really trying to say that the government can work, that there is some unity there, that that the U.S. has turned the corner in terms of COVID as well.
So Mario, from the White House's point of view, who's the audience tonight? Because it's a joint session of Congress, but there are only 200 people, as I understand it, there. They're not going to have 435 representatives, 100 senators because of COVID restrictions. So is this all just for television to get to the American people?
This is absolutely to reach the American people. As Rick and Jeannie laid out, I mean, we're looking at about $6 trillion. We're looking at tax hikes for a certain group of the population, the electorate, if you will, as well. So President Biden is really looking to take his case to the American people. On tomorrow, he'll be hitting the road to Atlanta, Georgia, which was key to his electoral victory. The rest of the administration will be fanning out as well. So what we're seeing tonight is kind of like this touch point where he'll be taking his message directly to the American people.
Okay, we're now seeing some of that 200 people coming into the hall. That's actually Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, who's coming down the aisle to go around. That's Patrick Leahy, I can recognize there. We're getting the leadership, as I say, it's only 200 people. For the radio audiences, Kamala Harris is now walking up on the dais. I don't think it's too early to note this will be the first time in history there will be 2 women behind the president as he gives his remarks. There's Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and she is knocking elbows with Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, as everyone is observing. They all have masks on, I must say, at this point. I understand the president might take his mask off, actually, when he begins to address the public. There's Chuck Schumer. He's the senator, the majority leader. He's the senator from New York. Rick?
You know, I want to pick up where Mario left off on this big government argument. I think he's spot on right there. Joe Biden is going to try and turn back the clock. And I mentioned earlier that this is more reminiscent of FDR than anybody else in our lifetime. When he was first elected to Congress, he served there for 36 years. Ronald Reagan was ushered into power saying government is too big and we can make it better and more efficient and less costly. We can cut your taxes, not raise them. Less government is better. And now we're hearing exactly the opposite in tonight's speech. Government can solve your problems. We need more money in government, not less. Government can be bigger and help you. We are the big brother government, and we are going to make things better. In a time of crisis for COVID, that makes tons of sense. But as COVID wanes, and we hope it wanes soon, we would wonder, is that really an argument that's going to spur a lot of support for Joe Biden, especially in the all-important midterm elections that are only a year and a half away?
Okay, Mario Parker, stick with us up on Capitol Hill. Of course, we'll keep Jeannie and Rick Davis with us. But right now, we're going to turn to the economics of all this. Much of what President Biden has done already and will propose to do tonight directly goes to our economy, how it will grow and how it will be structured going forward. For a view of the Biden plans from an economic perspective, welcome now Teresa Ghilarducci. She is the professor of economics at the New School and a visiting scholar in the economics department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. So welcome back. It's great to have you with us, Professor. Give us your overall view about the Biden presidency and what he's proposing. It seems to be a fairly fundamental restructuring of the American economy.
Right. It's a fundamental restructuring of the American economy in a way that Republicans and Democrats have been talking about for quite a while. Let's take education. Every Republican and Democrat I've ever talked to said that education is #1 issue, that everyone needs an opportunity to be educated. The economic logic of that is that it creates a skilled workforce. And when I see the trinity of plans here, the rescue plan, the jobs plan, and the families plan, I only see really one plan, and it's a plan to actually grow the economy from the supply side. The economic logic of these 3 plans is to get people back to work, make sure that that work is highly skilled, and make sure that the corporations that hire those people are actually well taken care of and win because they're innovative. And the government is coming in and providing not only the aggregate demand for the workers, but also providing the incentives for employers, for the companies to become innovative in climate change mitigation, for instance, to be innovative in the way they do healthcare. So I see actually a very good partnership with the government and the private sector in a way we saw evolving in every modern capitalist market economy.
I just want to say briefly here for our radio audiences, we're now watching the chamber as people come in. As I understand, on the Democrat side at least, it was chosen by lottery. Once again, there'll be 200 people rather than the 535 people normally that we have. And it's interesting to see who made the cut. I saw Lindsey Graham made the cut. Elizabeth Warren made the cut. Bernie Sanders made the cut. So we'll see who else made the cut. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did not make the cut, David Weston. Professor, I wanted to ask you, we spoke to a congresswoman today, and she was making the case that with this kind of taxation on the wealthy and on corporations, her fear or her concern is that they are just going to pass that buck to the lower class and the working class in the form of cutting jobs and or raising the cost of services and goods. How much of a concern is that with the level of taxation that President Biden is proposing here?
The last 5 years, you've seen a lot of very wealthy people, I know them, really change their tune. And they say something like this, and they're not humanitarians. You know, they care about people, but they're talking about their business model. They're very concerned that this imbalance of wealth and the imbalance of income is going to disrupt their future ability to make money. They understand that their competitors are paying such low wages, that workers have not had a raise in 30 years. They understand that the lack of wealth accumulation for the bottom 60% of the population is not good for business. One person said to me, a multi-billionaire, if we have a capitalist system, everybody needs some capital. So I'm seeing a sea change among the rich about their attitudes. And their attitudes are something like, we need to pay our fair share for a healthy, dynamic economy. And they know the lessons of economics, that you need aggregate demand coming from the middle class and the lower classes in order to sell your stuff. Walmart and Amazon are our biggest employers. They need their employees to be able to buy their stuff. So I'm actually seeing not any threat of what's called a capital strike. There's really no threat not to innovate. They're very excited about the kinds of spending that will happen in the infrastructure bill. Capital is all for the infrastructure bill. And they're probably, yeah.
I was just going to follow up on Jeannie's point, specifically on corporate taxes, because we do know that corporate taxes, by and large, do get passed along to consumers and have some negative effects sometimes on employees. Yeah. So doesn't that kind of fly in the face of this supply side growth strategy that you're describing?
Yeah, sure. So we're looking at an employer that now has a higher corporate tax rate and whether or not that will inhibit them from hiring people. Every economist knows that the decision to hire somebody has to do with their forecast of how much they can sell. I was a member of the board of directors of a company that had to pay the highest rate. There was no way they could offshore. It was a trucking company. And when I was in that boardroom, we never talked about marginal tax rates. All we talked about was the future demand for these trucking services, for the logistics. So in the boardroom, when we're talking about decisions about pay and we're talking about decisions about distributing profits, to our shareholders. It's all about what the future demand will going to be. So there is just really no credible research to show that these marginal changes affects those big decisions. The elasticity of demand is just not that sensitive to the corporate tax rate or the capital gains tax rate.
Yeah, for our radio audiences, we are watching the members come in now. Once again, it's 200 people instead of 535. And I certainly saw Lindsey Graham there, I believe, talking with Mitch McConnell. It's a little hard because they all have masks on, so it's a little harder to recognize people. And we also, by the way, we only have two members of the cabinet who will be there, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and the Secretary of State, he is Tony Blinken. And only one representative from the Supreme Court, it will be Chief Justice John Roberts. So we're watching them come in. Once again, it's the hall, but boy, it's a lot emptier than it normally is at this point. Professor, one other question I wanted to ask was enforcement and audits. One of the proposals coming out is $80 billion to hire auditors. Is it true that that money would be returned several-fold in terms of receipts?
Yeah.
And how long a delay would there be? Because audits, I mean, look at President Trump, former President Trump's audit, it still isn't done. So how long does it take to get that money?
I'm glad you asked that. I asked the leading economist on this very issue. He had to research this. And the answer was $1 spent on enforcement will yield $4 in revenue. So it's a 1-to-4 ratio. It's a good investment. That's a big return. And I think it takes a couple of years. So again, that 15-year promised by the White House, that hasn't really been scored yet, but it's pretty much accepted that this is a good investment. Whether or not that number, $700 billion are going to come from just enforcement, may or may not, may be inflated. I want to add one point, David, and you get this, we've talked before, is that Biden is bargaining right now. He doesn't have the kind of support that Roosevelt had. He has to bargain. So of course your first position is very, very big. I expect a lot of horse trading and a lot of bargaining in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, we're continuing to watch the floor here for our radio audiences. We just saw Chuck Schumer as well as Dick Durbin, the second-ranking Democrat in the Senate, down on the floor. Right now, we're seeing Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris up on the dais as Nancy Pelosi is calling the House to order. Once again, we're looking at a start time of something like 9 o'clock, about 14 minutes from right now. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us, Professor. That's Teresa Ghilarducci. She's professor of economics at the New School. And now we want to talk some about the politics. What can really get done up on Capitol Hill? For that, we welcome our Bloomberg government reporter, Emily Wilkins. Still with me, of course, our Bloomberg contributors, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis. So, Emily, actually, the professor already pointed us in this direction. How much of this can get done?
Well, there's a good chance that Democrats can get something done. They certainly want to get something done. The question is, what can they get done keeping all 50 Democrats on board? I mean, let's just be real here at this point. This tax proposal that's coming out tonight, Republicans have already said that there's no way that they're going to touch it. Maybe they'll do something with the infrastructure component, but not the part that Biden's going to be focusing on tonight. And we've already heard complaints from Democrats across the spectrum. Senator Joe Manchin, a more moderate Democrat from West Virginia, he said that the amount of spending in this bill made him uncomfortable. He's already come out saying that the proposed corporate tax rate that President Biden has put forward, that 28%, that's too high from him. But then on the other side of Congress as well, you hear a myriad of individuals who want more things in the bill. Powerful Appropriations Chair Rosa DeLauro wants that child care tax credit to be permanent, not just extended for 5 years like the president has. Progressives, they want to see Medicare expanded. They want to see lowering prescription drug prices. And don't forget all of those New York and New Jersey House members who've said that they want to see the end of that cap on state and local tax deductions. So President Biden, certainly what he says tonight is going to be taken very seriously by the lawmakers in that chamber and the ones who aren't able to make it. But remember, it's Congress who's going to be the one to write this legislation. And when they get a hold of this bill, they already have a number of changes that they want to make.
Yeah, Emily, as you said, Joe Manchin from West Virginia will be key. A bit of color here from our colleague Billy House, who's there, says that actually Joe Manchin didn't get a seat on the floor. He's up in the gallery along with Mitt Romney. So it shows who didn't get a seat. Joe Manchin's a pretty important senator, right, Jeannie?
Yeah, that's not the Joe you want to put up in the gallery tonight. Emily, you just hit on something I wanted to ask you about, and it had to do with the Medicare expansion. We understand that Bernie Sanders was one of many Democrats on the progressive wing frustrated by the fact that it looks like in this American Families proposal that the Biden administration is not going to take on big pharma or the healthcare industry, at least not on this point. Are you hearing anything from the progressives in terms of what's happening on healthcare?
I mean, I think the progressives are really disappointed, both Senator Sanders as well as progressives who I've spoken to in the House, who were really pushing for healthcare to be a part of this particular component. But we've heard Senator Sanders say that he doesn't think this is over yet. He's going to continue to try and push to get some sort of Medicare expansion into the final product of the bill. That's expected to pass through budget reconciliation. So, of course, the big question there, can it pass the Senate parliamentarian test? Is it going to be one of the requisites of spending enough money and having a significant enough impact on the budget to actually get through the process? So I'd expect to continue to see Senator Sanders push on that. Remember, I mean, Senator Sanders, he's now head of the budget committee. It's a powerful spot to be on, and he certainly has some sway within the halls of Congress.
Okay, Emily, thanks so much. Please stay with us. We'll be coming back to you through the evening. To reset here, we are waiting for an escort of President Biden into the hall. We have Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and we have Kamala Harris, the Vice President, up on the dais. And we're seeing various people of the select who made it. We just saw the two Massachusetts senators, Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey, talking with one another. Again, I will say, all with masks on. It's only 200 people out of the 535 people who might be there. So we'll continue to bring this to you. I think that they've actually gavelled to order and asked the escort committee of some 24 senators and congressmen to go get the president and bring him into the hall. That will take a few minutes. In the meantime, we want to welcome now Frank Luntz. He's politics and communications consultant and a famed, it's not understating it to say famed, pollster. Still with me, of course, our Bloomberg contributors, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis. So, Frank, perfect person to have tonight. Let's start here. President Biden, I think at least, has changed the way he talks since he became president. He was known as vice president for rambling and going on and being very undisciplined. He's a lot more disciplined communicator, isn't he, or is that just my imagination?
He's more disciplined, but he's also moved politically. He ran as a centrist, ran as a unifier, and he's been governing. If you compared his agenda to Bernie Sanders from 2016, you would have said that this is Bernie Sanders. And maybe it's that the Democratic Party has changed, but clearly the president is committed to an agenda that's very aggressive, an agenda that involves programs that he did not talk about during the campaign. And so while his sentences may be sharper and he may be more disciplined in terms of spending, which is what the Republicans will be looking at, he's got a very bold, aggressive agenda.
Frank, good to see you tonight. And I wanted to ask you, in the past when we've polled some of these policies, the policies tend to poll well. Everybody likes free education. But when they poll on the taxes, it's a loser. Do you see any change in the electorate these days where somehow that will upset the balance?
Well, I'm going to surprise you, but in polling that we've done within the last 72 hours, the public is more concerned about the spending than they are about the tax increases, because in the end, they trust the president that the tax increases are only going to be for corporations or wealthy individuals. It's the spending that they think might be too much, that America can't afford it, that it could start inflation. And in focus groups that we've been doing, they talk about the spending much more than they talk about the tax increases.
So, Frank, you are, of course, a famed pollster, as David Weston said, and one thing you're famous for is knowing what words work with the public. And I notice in the excerpts we're getting from Senator Tim Scott's address tonight, his response to the president, he is pulling out the word socialism. So I wanted to ask you, in your discussions, focus groups, and polls, is that term something that really still scares a good deal of Republicans and moderate Democrats and independents?
Well, it's a partisan attack, and it still works with Republicans. It still works with conservatives, but it does not work as well in the center. The Republicans are obviously hoping that they can push Joe Biden to the left in terms of his reputation, in terms of his image. And this is very important for them because the midterm elections, I hate to say this, are only 18 months away. And I've seen Republicans in the first 2 years of a Democratic administration capture Congress in 1994 and do the same thing in 2010. So for them to be successful, it requires pushing Joe Biden to be an extremist. That said, socialism may have worked in helping Republicans win some seats in 2020. I don't think it's going to work as well in 2022.
So to reset for our audiences, both TV and radio right now, we are waiting for President Biden to arrive at the hall. That should happen in about 6 minutes or so from right now if they remain on schedule. But to describe it to the radio audiences, it's 200 people out of the 535 who get to be there. There was a lottery, at least on the Democratic side. And as you look around the hall, half of the seats are cordoned off with dark blue sashes, so you can't sit in them. We're told that no one will be able to sit on the aisle, so we may not have the mobbing of the president that is historic at State of the Union addresses. It's quite a different scene. And we had the diplomatic corps come in. They had 2 representatives. We're going to have 1 representative of the Supreme Court. That is the Chief Justice, who is walking in right now. John Roberts is walking in. Only 1 justice of the 9 is going to be there. We're going to have 2 cabinet members, the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. So it's a very scaled-down operation, I think it's fair to say. So Frank, let me ask you, you are a real specialist in the difference between what people think they're communicating and what people hear. What will President Biden think he's communicating tonight, and what will people actually hear?
He's going to communicate that these are the priorities, that this is America's agenda. And I know he's going to take several shots at Wall Street, which will interest the viewers, saying that Wall Street didn't build it. The middle class built it, and the unions built the middle class. And that will probably go over well among a population that's very hostile to what happens in New York City and what happens, quite frankly, in Washington as well. However, if the feeling, if it's just a laundry list of major mega spending items and the media starts to add it up, it's not billions anymore. It's it's trillions of dollars. At some point, the public says, wait a minute, I've got to pay for that, and we can't afford it. So he's going to be communicating that these are the priorities of the middle class. And the Republicans are going to be saying, you, hardworking taxpayers, are going to be paying for it. Who wins in that battle? It's too early to tell.
Frank, what's the risk tonight that the president tries to appeal to the blue-collar, working-class base that actually voted significantly for Donald Trump 2 years ago and misses that mark and puts in jeopardy Congress in 2022 midterms, which we know have a tendency to go against the party in power anyway?
So, Rick, Frank, just hold that thought, because I want to explain why we're hearing the applause. This is for the First Lady of the United States. That is Jill Biden, who has just entered the hall. Sorry, Frank, go ahead.
No, it's a very good point that those are the voters who are going to determine who controls Congress. The Republicans are doing better among working class voters than they have since Ronald Reagan in 1984, but they're doing worse among upper middle class voters in the suburbs than at any time since really the mid-'70s in Watergate. Whoever wins that segment of the others population, if Republicans can win back the upper middle class, they will take Congress. If Democrats can win back the working class voters, they will keep Congress. So, Rick, you've identified the group that's in play, and that's why the question then becomes, are these programs for working people, or are working people going to have to pay for these programs?
Thank you so much, Frank. It's always a real delight to have you with us, as pollster Frank Luntz. We are just minutes away now from President Biden's address to a joint session of Congress. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg White House correspondent Mario Parker up on Capitol Hill. Still with me, of course, are Bloomberg contributors Jeannie Shan Zeno and Rick Davis. So, Mario, let's come back to you for a second. Draw a contrast between what we're going to see tonight and what we saw with President Trump. I mean, some of it is because of COVID, but it also seems to be a very different style.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, Joe Biden is very comfortable on the Hill, right? He spent almost 4 decades here as a senator. He spent another 8 as vice president to Barack Obama. This isn't his first rodeo, if you will, with a joint session address, even though this one will look starkly different than the ones we've seen in years past, as you mentioned, because of the COVID protocols. But this is kind of Joe Biden's wheelhouse, right? The camaraderie with other congressional leadership, the glad handling, some of the old Washington Moors. He's comfortable in that spot.
Jeannie, just before you go, we just saw the two cabinet officers. There will only be two. We saw Mr. Austin, General Austin, I should say, the Secretary of Defense, as well as Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, come into the hall. They just took their seats. Jeannie?
And no need for a designated survivor tonight. No, sorry, Kiefer Sutherland. No, Mario, on that point, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the president's plans after the speech tonight when he takes this on the road. What are you expecting to hear as he heads to Georgia and to Philly to celebrate Amtrak's 50th anniversary?
Right. He for a while has pantomimed that Georgia's significance, right? He owes his presidency to the turnout that we saw in Atlanta, particularly among African-American voters. He's going to take this message to the road, both to Philadelphia and to Georgia, and then, according to Jen Psaki, the press secretary, to yet be named states as well, right, where he's making this case. One interesting point, and I think that you all kind of touched on it as well, is that the president is also continuing to go after these disaffected former, like, Reagan Democrats, right, that Donald Trump took from Democrats, right? So we'll hear a lot tonight and then also on the road about how this American jobs plan will benefit blue-collar workers, how it will benefit those that don't have a college degree or those that don't even have an associate's degree. And so we'll see a lot of that on the road as well.
Well, once again, we're waiting for the arrival of President Biden into the hall. We just saw, once again, the First Lady, Joe Biden. I believe that was with the First Gentleman, actually, Kamala Harris's husband. They're sitting not next to each other because there is a seat in between that's marked off. So Rick, you've been involved in an awful lot of State of the Union addresses, a lot of campaigns, a lot of administrations. To what extent is President Biden really being advantaged right now by the fact that there's a lot of disarray, it would appear, on the Republican side of the aisle?
Yeah, I think you're right, David. I'm not sure that there's been much of a loyal opposition that's been particularly effective. As you saw, they ushered through the COVID rescue plan without a single Republican vote in the House and Senate, and got a $2 trillion worth of spending pretty fast within the first 100 days of his tenure as president. I think today is really a moment for Biden, though. I mean, I think Republicans are sort of window dressing. This is a guy who's been in Congress for almost 50 years. You know, he sat in various places in this chamber during State of the Unions for a long period of time, 8 years for Barack Obama, as a senator for 36 years before that. I mean, it has to be a special moment for him personally to actually get the best seat in the House for a change.
We're just seeing the leadership of the House actually come in. We saw Steny Hoyer, the majority leader. We've also seen Kevin McCarthy, and we also saw, I believe, Jim Clyburn come in. Once again, it's a little difficult to tell because everyone has a mask on, and I think I can recognize them, but I'm not 100% sure, Jeannie.
It's hard to tell. It's been a strange year, and I think, the historic nature, as you mentioned earlier, of seeing two women behind the president tonight is something that we should underscore. Nancy Pelosi talked about it earlier, and of course, it's something that, a lot of people have waited a long time for.
We're just about, I believe, to have the announcement of the President of the United States. But to your point, it seems like an age ago now that President George W. Bush turned graciously at his State of the Union address and congratulated Nancy Pelosi on being the first woman ever to be Speaker of the House.
That's right. And what a gracious moment. 2007, and just about a little more than a decade later, she is joined by the first female vice president. So it is quite a remarkable time. I think with everything going on, we tend to forget how historic it is to see these two women standing side by side. And our first second gentleman.
We're now seeing the majority leader, Chuck Schumer, coming in, and as well as, I believe, Mitch McConnell behind him, who was the majority leader, now is, of course, the minority leader, as we continue to wait for the announcement of the President of the United States. It'll be interesting to see the dynamic in the room because, again, it's less than half full, and you're not going to necessarily have the same thunderous applause. We'll see how it plays.
Yeah, and it may make the speech a bit shorter than we usually have because it may not be interrupted by as much thunderous applause, although I'm sure there will be some with the congressmen and women in the room.
Yeah, Rick, I mean, Ronald Reagan, I believe, was the first one to have the guests up in the balcony that he'd call out. I think he only had one back in those days. And it seems to have just grown and grown and grown. By the time we had President Trump, we were awarding Presidential Medals of Freedom and giving people citizenship and scholarships and all kinds of things. We're going to have to do away with that this time.
Yeah, from the balcony. I mean, that was probably half the speech he gave in his last State of the Union. But yeah, it's a special moment to be able to pull out real Americans, heroes in our communities. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen today. My understanding is earlier today, Jill Biden hosted some of those individuals who would normally be seated with her up in the balcony and add a little bit of local flavor, if you will, to a very august proceeding.
So Mario, who worked on this speech? Do we know?
The president's team worked on it, the Ron Klain, Steve Ricchetti, this ancillary group that the president has had around him for a number of years now, those folks that he trusts, those folks that kind of understand his language, understands the notes that he likes to hit, the kind of folksy language that Joe Biden employs, the sympathetic and empathetic language that he employs as well, those folks that really understand how to hit that tone for him.
Yeah, once again, we're waiting right now for the President of the United States to enter the hall. There will be an announcement from the Sergeant at Arms. They've opened the doors here, but we, of course, have the Sergeant at Arms come in and announces the President of the United States as if we didn't know who he was when he comes in. We can see now, for the radio guys, we can see President Joe Biden there just behind as they're preparing to announce the President of the United States entering the hall for his first ever address to a joint session of Congress.
The President of the United States.
It's interesting to watch it because it's in such a contrast to what we've seen in past times. They were, as we understand, asked not to shake hands. President Biden actually started to shake somebody's hand. It's all fist bumps. They are bumping fists. They all have masks on both sides of the aisle. And there is a standing ovation of the 200 people that are there, but we have to say that there's a lot more empty spaces than there are full spaces. It's very different. It's also much faster. If you remember from earlier State of the Union, it usually takes forever for the president to get down because every single member on both sides of the aisle wants to shake his hand and reach out. Can't do that anymore. He's now just saying hello to John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States. There's Bernie Sanders, who gives him sort of a hug, pat on the back there. Okay, he's now going up to the dais. He's now not going to shake hands, I don't think. No, he can't, with Kamala Harris, his vice president, as well as Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. They continue to applaud as the president steps up to the podium to deliver his first ever address to a joint session of Congress. He delivers it now to the hands of Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, a copy in a leather-bound thing, and then a copy to Nancy Pelosi. I suspect she will not rip this one up like she did one recently.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good to be back. Mitch and Chuck will understand it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time. First Lady, I'm her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Turning peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America is ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America, none. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together, we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling, with your help, everyone's help, we're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. You're eligible now. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January, down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all the adults in America have gotten at least one shot. A mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona, I asked the nurse, I said, "What's it like?" She looked at me and she said, "It's like every shot is giving a dose of hope," was her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida who has a child suffering from an autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she's worried, and she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried. Cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on their kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and school bus drivers and cafeteria workers have been vaccinated. Grandparents hugging their children and grandchildren instead of pressing hands against the window to say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it, you know it better than any group of Americans, there's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You all know it when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. The single mom in Texas who wrote me, she said she couldn't work, but she said the relief check put food on the table and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor, something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective in this crisis, has been cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, nice cars, lined up for miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own, man. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger's down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this, but the American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses that reopen and keep their employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act when I established a special sign-up period to do that. 800,000 in that period. We're making one of the largest one-time ever investments, ever, in improving health care for veterans. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. And maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this was all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, if you think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America, our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united two oceans and brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I propose the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. It creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure, jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways, jobs building ports and airports, rail corridors, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines, so every American can drink clean water. And in the process, it will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. It creates jobs connecting every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. This is going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, if she would, because I know it will get done. Creates jobs building a modern power grid. Our grids are vulnerable to storms, hacks, catastrophic failures with tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during the winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs that lay thousands of miles of transmission lines needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look, the American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs and back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Medicare waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican, Democrat or Republican voters. Their great concern, almost as much as their children, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits, continuing a cycle of growth. For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy-efficient buildings and homes, electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and get paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So, folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have the capacity. We're the brightest, best trained people in the world. The American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s. Buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. And I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now, I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in the years to come. It is an 8-year program. These are good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well, equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, the American Jobs Plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change, and some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence, and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work in national security issues know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs that enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create a similar advanced research projects agency for health. And here's what it would do. It would have a singular purpose: to develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed the cancer proposal in the last year I was vice president. Almost $9 million going to NIH. And they've excused the point of personal privilege. I'll never forget you standing, Mitch, and saying, "Name it after my deceased son." It meant a lot. But so many of us have deceased sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure like the ones we're talking about have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before the Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies because it takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and, in turn, America. First is access to good education. When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 20th century. But the world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we'd think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in a position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. The research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college or something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. But their students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on that provide those jobs of the future. Jill is a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Jill. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee when I'm proposing in legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high-quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. We're one of the few industrial countries in the world. No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck, or taking care of themselves and their loved ones, or parent or spouse or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if you're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it. So we did that in the last piece of legislation we passed. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans who buy their coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so their premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly it's needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families on the Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. We know how to do this. The last president had that as an objective. We all know how outrageously expensive drugs are in America. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices of anywhere in the world, right here in America. Nearly 3 times for the same drug, nearly 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. Let's do what we talked about for all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. By the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. Lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough, Democrats and Republicans. Let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. A recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take the top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them, whose taxes you want to raise? Instead, who's they going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. It used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them is they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as experiencing what we're experiencing now, the pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America was an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 from the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone, it's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to ultimately matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world: China, Russia, India, European Union. And I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. My attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity and raise the standard of living of almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I proposed tonight also advance a foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I've said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms and to our alliances. And I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences if they turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionally to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a son serving in a war zone. Today, we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who are not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. And make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want... I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down through generations because you have an access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over the past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. And I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact on this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer wearing Kevlar vests? They'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform, and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it, because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. It's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration. And it helped keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job done. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers. The young people who've only known America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster. As well as a pathway to citizenship for farm workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. But let's act. And if we truly want to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history, in the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. And if we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. As I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation, and I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because of what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just, as one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There's not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
And so concludes President Biden's first address to a joint session of Congress, lasting about an hour and 5 minutes by my reckoning, at least, to a hall that was much emptier than otherwise, but there was a lot of applause, you'd have to say, as the president now puts back on his mask and steps down from the dais to applause. It'll probably take less time than normally takes. He started out by saying that America was a house on fire when he inherited it about 100 days ago now, but it has come back, both with respect to COVID and the economy, and also what he called the attack on democracy. Then he went through a long litany of the things that he would like to get accomplished, the investment in America that he thinks is necessary to make us competitive, to take us forward, to realize our full potential. And then he did, yes, turn to how we're going to pay for it. And he did not shrink from saying we're going to raise some taxes on some folks. He tried to assure people it would only be people making over $400,000 a year. That will get a lot of scrutiny without a doubt. And then he turned to more social issues, things like immigration, things like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and gun control also he raised at the end. And then he had a rousing finish. So now we want to bring back our political contributors. They are, of course, Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino. So, Jeannie, what are your initial reactions?
My initial reaction has to do with this fight between democracy and autocracy. autocracy that he keeps coming back to. To me, this has been a major theme of Joe Biden's first 100 days. And he wants to make the case that America can deliver, as he said, that we can deliver to the people and that we can have faith in America because it delivers. And I think the big question going forward is, can he indeed do that? He made a lot of promises tonight. He asked Congress to act on a variety of bills, but I'm not convinced that he's going to get done this litany of things that he laid out. So I think he has set the bar incredibly high. And I would just say one thing that I get disappointed about is that he included very little structural changes in his discussion about deliverance. So he didn't talk about things like getting rid of the filibuster or anything along those lines. So I think he's going to have Democrats go it alone, and I'm not sure it's going to be as effective as he would like it to be for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. Something you've written about, including in your book about structural changes. We didn't hear much about that. So, Rick, what about this democracy versus autocracy issue? It wasn't just that abstract. I thought he made it rather personal with President Xi, saying he knows President Xi really well. He spent a lot of time with him, and he said that he is in deadly earnest to make his country the most consequential in the world.
Yeah, he sort of started out early by making it an issue of Buy America. Somehow, we don't want to trust anything that's coming in from some of our allies, and then pivots quickly to China, where he talked about how he and Xi faced off on numerous occasions, including a 2-hour speech. And I thought it was a pretty forceful pushback to President Xi as the sort of leader of the autocracy movement around the world. And he then quickly followed suit and talked about some of the other issues that are on the table. Not much of a discussion related to the Iran nuclear deal, which I thought would take up a little bit more space, since that has been a pretty important issue for the Biden administration coming into this speech. But no question, he threw some elbows with China and Russia and Iran and these other sort of competitors, near-peer competitors to the United States. It'll be interesting to see if there's any reaction from these countries. It's unusual to let this lie, but there was also some olive branches. We want to work with Russia on climate. We want to find ways of doing things with China on the same issue. What's interesting is no mention of Trump and the Trump trade deal with China that I would have thought could have been a way for him to actually announce something new to be happening with China, where maybe we strip back some of the Trump trade deal. But no mention of Trump tonight. He clearly had no interest in bringing him back into the discussion.
Mario Parker covers the White House for us here at Bloomberg. He is down on Capitol Hill. Mario, I'm curious, there were a lot of things listed in President Biden's speech, and it was very comprehensive. Sometimes when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. Of all those things he listed, what does he care the most about?
Well, he cares the most right now. He cares the most about the infrastructure bill, of course, and then also the families plan. We saw him devote a significant amount of his speech to both of those things. He really tried to sell it. And just to piggyback on Rick and Janie's point about China, he really tried to stoke American competitiveness, right? He really tried to frame China as this harbinger that's lurking for America's spot atop the world, and the need to kind of rally support around infrastructure to stay competitive and to stay ahead as well. So he really tried to bring the China issue at home to common Americans.
So, Jeannie, as the president was speaking, actually, there was some movement in the markets with equity futures actually popping up. And you can speculate exactly why that might be. It might be because they really like a lot of these programs. It might be because there were really strong tech earnings out. But at the same time, the 10-year yield actually came in a little bit, which is interesting. So that it was not too bullish. I wonder, though, really how much the markets really are incorporating what the president had to say about taxes. Let's listen to part of what he had to say about closing loopholes and all those rich people.
We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes.
So, Jeannie, that's not particularly good news for the 0.3%, if it's that small a number of people. At the same time, I guess it could be good news for the rest of the country if they think they're going to get a lot of infrastructure and a lot of health care and a lot of senior care and child care.
Yeah, and I think the question here is not necessarily at the individual level, but at the level of the market and the economy as a whole. And one thing I think the president did is something that Democrats have been yearning to do for decades, which is to attack the trickle-down economics theory. He had, a statement there where he said trickle-down economics don't work. You need to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out, or something to that effect. I don't want to misquote him. But I think that is an indication as to how transformative he wants to be and he sees himself as being vis-a-vis the U.S. economy. And to your point, I think it is a question if he's able to realize that, but also is there pushback then from people who have an entirely different point of view about how the economy works, and in fact, whether his approach is going to be more damaging to the economy overall, not just to individuals, but to the market and the economy overall.
For our radio audience right now, what's happening is President Biden has concluded his remarks. He's working his way out of the chamber. He made pretty good progress up toward the end of the aisle, but now he's gotten stopped. He's talking to a number of people, everybody with masks on, but they're reasonably close together. So he's making his way out of the chamber. And then, as I understand, there'll be about a 5-minute delay after he's actually left the chamber, and then we'll hear the Republican response. So Rick, give me a little help with somebody who's run major campaigns, including John McCain's for president. My impression's always been the candidate never goes wrong by running against the media. Can a candidate go wrong by running against Wall Street? Because I must say the president quite specifically called out Wall Street and said Wall Street didn't build this country.
Yeah, Wall Street didn't build this country. Main Street built this country. And look, I mean, this is a classic class warfare tactic, right? Is that those guys in New York, they're ripping us all off. They're not paying their taxes. They're not creating jobs that we care about. Main Street's been hurt during the pandemic, and we're going to rebuild it. We're going to tax the wealthy and, give it to the working class. I mean, this has always been an argument in politics, and it's a dangerous argument in politics because Americans are ultimately aspirational, right? The person who's making less than $400,000 a year wants to make more than $400,000 a year, and they want to know that their pathway isn't encumbered by a massive tax bill for a government that, frankly, they really, there's no voter out there that thinks the government is going to solve all their problems. But free money, the speech tonight put about $6 trillion of free money on the table. That is a pretty big motivator.
Yeah, that's not very unpopular, I'd say. We're continuing to watch President Biden talk with some of the members on his way out. And again, we'll have we've got a Republican senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, will be delivering the response, but only about 5 minutes after President Biden actually makes it out of the chamber. I want to go up to our Capitol Hill correspondent. She covers Congress for us. That's Emily Wilkins. So, Emily, one of the things I thought I took away from the speech was President Biden on so many subjects said, you got to act, you got to act. I've been here, you can act. Is there any real prospect of getting much of what he's talking about through the Congress?
David, not really. I mean, a number of these bills that he brought up, the PRO Act, which is supposed to be supportive of unions, the background check bill for guns, the Voting Rights Act, all of these have passed the House, and now they have stalled in the Senate because Senate Democrats cannot get those 10 Republican votes that they need to clear the filibuster. And that's actually where a lot of the debate is now on Capitol Hill, particularly a number of House members, 100 of them, recently signed a letter to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying, hey, we need to get things done for voters. This is important for us to win in 2022. We need to get something done here with the filibuster. And yet, in that speech that you just heard from President Biden, not a single mention of the filibuster, not a single mention of changing Senate rules, just really encouraging them to get things done. But let's be honest here, there's really no momentum in the Senate for Democrats and Republicans to work together on a lot of these trickier issues.
So President Biden now has actually left the hall. He's out in the hallway outside. And so we should be about 5 minutes away or so from the Republican response. We have the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, talking with Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, as well as Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense. I want to go back to Mario Parker, who covers the White House for us. And Mario, it struck me that one of the lines that I thought got the most applause from both sides of the aisle was when he said these wind turbines don't have to be built in Beijing, they can be built in Pittsburgh. Let's listen to what the line was.
There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason.
And you can hear the response to that. Everybody was on their feet and applauding on both sides of the aisle. So it was surprising to me, I guess, a bit how much of this speech was about U.S. versus, for example, China on trade things and really competing. A lot of the ways, Mario, it seemed to me that the president made his pitch for some of the things he wants, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's child care, whether it's senior care, was actually that's how we need to compete with China.
Right, absolutely. We saw some of this populist tone that's kind of dominated our politics for the last 4 to 6 years. We saw President Biden kind of hone in on that in some ways. And then President Biden, of course, has been known as blue-collar Joe. Pittsburgh, of course, has a rich history of blue-collar jobs. So he was trying to evoke that image for the American people, that there's no need to be outsourcing this work. I think at one point in the speech he did explicitly say that the jobs that he wants to create wouldn't have a risk of being outsourced. So he's speaking to these Americans that have had, if you will, economic anxiety, that have been worried about being laid off, that have worried about education and whether or not they'll be able to support their families with the type of jobs that they've had. He's saying that he could promise that the economy will have these new jobs, these new blue-collar jobs where you don't have to be necessarily highly educated, and that the government will figure out a way to get through the skills for them as well, and child care.
So, Jeannie, to follow up on that point, I did think one of the powerful moments was when President Biden really faced the camera and said, you're out there, you're wondering whether these jobs will be for you or not. And I'm going to tell you they will be, because 90% of the jobs in the infrastructure bill will not require a college degree, and 75% won't require an associate's degree.
It's something that Joe Biden, I mean, he is, appealing with this populist message to those blue collar workers, the people where he talks about that he grew up. This is the Joe Biden we're familiar with. And there was an incredible middle point of this speech where he was making that populist push. Buy American, to your point, these jobs will be for you. He talked about, you mentioned this, that Wall Street didn't build America, Americans did, and it was unions that built the middle class. So it's something that he has pushed for. It's something Democrats believe is a reason they won in 2020. And if they hope to do okay in 2022 and 2024, I'm sorry to raise these, David, those elections are coming. They're going to have to keep that support, because that's how Donald Trump won in 2016, and they need to keep that support. So we see that appeal with Joe Biden tonight once again.
I'd be disappointed if you didn't raise the next election. You're always going to do it first.
I always do.
We're only about a minute away or so from Tim Scott, the Republican from South Carolina, giving his response. So, Rick, very quickly at the end here, I did notice he specifically referred to the IBEW making those charging stations.
Yeah, I mean, this was a great speech for organized labor, right? He wants to talk about the PRO Act and getting that passed. I mean, no chance of that getting passed, but it was a great nod to the unions. IBEW building all those charging stations. He talked about the people who built our country were the unions. I mean, that's a stretch. So I think that he was building out his constituencies for what Jeannie was talking about, those important elections coming up in 2022. He needs the unions to be able to be strongly behind him, not just to be able to create new jobs in these markets, but also to deliver the politics come 22.
Rick, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment, because I think we're about to go to Senator Rick Scott from South Carolina.
State of South Carolina. We just heard President Biden's first address to Congress. Our president seems like a good man. His speech was full of good words, but President Biden promised you a specific kind of leadership. He promised to unite a nation, to lower the temperature, to govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground, about this feeling that our nation is sliding off its shared foundation and how we move forward together. Growing up, I never dreamed I would be standing here tonight. When I was a kid, my parents divorced. My mother, my brother, and I moved in with my grandparents. 3 of us sharing one bedroom. I was disillusioned and angry and I nearly failed out of school. But I was blessed. First, with a praying mama. And let me say this to the single mothers out there who are working their tails off, working hard, trying to make the ends meet, wondering if it's worth it. You can bet it is. God bless your amazing effort on the part of your kids. I was also blessed by a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, and finally with a string of opportunities that are only possible here in America. This past year, I've watched COVID attack every rung of the ladder that helped me up. So many families have lost parents and grandparents too early. So many small businesses have gone under. Becoming a Christian transformed my life, but for months, too many churches were shut down. Most of all, I'm saddened that millions of kids have lost a year of learning when they could not afford to lose a single day. Locking vulnerable kids out of the classroom is locking adults out of their future. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did. Science has shown for months that schools are safe. But too often, powerful grown-ups set science aside, and kids like me were left behind. The clearest case I've seen for school choice in our lifetimes, because we know that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Last year, under Republican leadership, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID packages. Congress supported our schools, our hospitals, saved our economy, and funded Operation Warp Speed, delivering vaccines in record time. All 5 bills got 90 votes in the Senate. Common sense found common ground. In February, Republicans told President Biden we wanted to keep working together to finish this fight. But Democrats wanted to go it alone. They spent almost $2 trillion on a partisan bill that the White House bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Only 1% went to vaccinations, no requirement to reopen schools promptly. COVID brought Congress together 5 times. This administration pushed us apart. Another issue that should unite us is infrastructure. Republicans support everything you think of when you think of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, high-speed broadband. We're in for all of that. But again, Democrats want a partisan wish list. They won't even build bridges to build bridges. Less than 6% of the president's plan goes to roads and bridges. It's a liberal wish list of big government waste, plus the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Experts say when all is said and done, it would lower wages of the average American worker and shrink our economy. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best. Infrastructure spending that shrinks our economy is not common sense. Weakening our southern borders and creating a crisis is not compassionate. The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court. This is not common ground. Nowhere do we need common ground more desperately than in our discussions of race. I have experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal. But my Democratic colleagues blocked it. I extended an olive branch. I offered amendments, but Democrats used a filibuster to block the debate from even happening. My friends across the aisle seemed to want the issue more than they wanted a solution. But I'm still working. I'm hopeful that this will be different. When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress, but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination, and it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who's voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and so do the voters. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce election day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab. This misplaced outrage is supposed to justify Democrats' new sweeping bill that would take over elections for all 50 states. It would send public funds to political campaigns you disagree with and make the bipartisan Federal Elections Commission partisan. This is not about civil rights or our racial past. It's about rigging elections in the future. And no, the same filibuster that President Obama and President Biden praised when they were senators, the same filibuster that the Democrats used to kill my police reform bill last year has not suddenly become a racist relic just because the shoe is now on the other foot. Race is not a political weapon to settle every issue the way one side wants. It's far too important. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. This administration inherited a tide that had already turned. The coronavirus is on the run. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding. So why do we feel so divided? Anxious. A nation with so much cause for hope should not feel so heavy laden. A president who promised to bring us together should not be pushing agendas that tear us apart. The American family deserves better, and we know what better looks like. Just before COVID, we had the most inclusive economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, and a 70-year low nearly for women. Wages were growing faster at the bottom than at the top. The bottom 25% saw their wages go up faster than the top 25%. That happened because Republicans focused on expanding opportunity for all Americans. In addition to that, we passed opportunity zones, criminal justice reform, and permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities for the first time ever. We fought the drug epidemic, rebuilt our military, and cut taxes for working families and single moms like the one that raised me. Our best future will not come from Washington schemes or socialist dreams. It will come from you, the American people, Black, Hispanic, white, and Asian, Republican and Democrat, brave police officers in Black neighborhoods. We are not adversaries. We are family. We are all in this together, and we get to live in the greatest country on earth. The country where my grandfather in his 94 years saw his family go from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. So I am more than hopeful. I am confident that our finest hour is yet to come. Original sin is never the end of the story, not in our souls and not for our nation. The real story is always redemption. I am standing here because my mom has prayed me through some really tough times. I believe our nation has succeeded the same way because generations of Americans in their own ways have asked for grace and God has supplied it. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
We have been listening to Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, deliver the Republican response to President Biden's address. I'm tempted to say a bit of a benediction there at the end. I felt like, given my tradition, I should say amen almost. But it was quite a powerful response as these things go. Gina, I want to come to you first, if I could, because one of the things I thought we heard that we may hear a fair amount of is describing what's going on with the tax hikes as the job-killing tax hikes. I suspect that's part of what we're going to hear from Republicans, that if you have all those tax hikes you're proposing, you're going to kill jobs. You're not going to create them.
That is what we are going to hear. And I think, this is, as we know historically, a really, really tough speech to give. Just ask Marco Rubio. It is historically not a good environment for these people to respond. And yet I think Tim Scott, he's a really compelling figure. I think he did a very good job. And I think he echoed what are going to be the Republican talking points going forward. Number one, that Joe Biden is a lot of talk, but he's not delivering on his promise of bipartisanship. And number two, what you said is that with all this taxation, you are killing competitiveness, you are killing jobs, and you are going to drive the American economy down. And oh, by the way, America's not a racist country, which is something that many Democrats and Republicans, I'm sure, would take exception to as they see a country with institutionalized racism. So a lot there, but very much echoing what Republicans feel and want to put forward, and many Americans agree with that.
Yeah, as he put it, you don't fight discrimination with discrimination. That we're defining people by the color of their skin, according again again to Tim Scott. So, Rick, I want to come to you on an issue here that Tim Scott also raised, which is what President Biden is really proposing is that we have Washington get involved in the family from preschool right all the way through college. A lot of intervention. In the meantime, during the speech, as I understand it, we had Secretary Yellen, Janet Yellen of the Treasury Department, come up with a statement about the issue of giving child support, child care, saying historically child care and other social programs to help families haven't been seen as crucial investments underpinning American growth and productivity, but this is a failure of perspective. So she's basically saying we got to rethink this because it actually is a critical investment for our future. So you've got a real disagreement there, a real divergence of ways between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans saying you're getting too involved in our lives. Democrats saying the more involved in our lives you get, the better we'll be off.
Yeah, it's a compelling thing from Janet Yellen, former Fed Treasury Secretary now. Usually they focus on the economic underpinnings of the policies of the president. And here she sort of weighs in on some of the more social aspects of the policy, as you described it, the education program where Biden adds 2 years of pre-K and adds 2 years of post K through 12 to go to community college as a game changer for the public on access to education. But look, I mean, we're in a full sales program, right? And you'll notice that Senator Tim Scott really didn't address any of those kinds of issues. He kept away from really talking about the kind of the policies that Joe Biden was talking about tonight, because he knows those to be relatively popular out there, and instead took off after how you were going to fund them. And Jeannie is right. There will be now an open attack line that Republicans will use, that, these tax increases, the largest in a generation, as Tim Scott said, are going to stifle economic growth in the future, not add to it, and that these domestic policies are taking us towards socialism. So, I mean, that's the game plan for the Republicans for the next year and a half. There's no indication that there's a bridge to go anywhere, other than maybe Joe Biden sort of giving a head nod to Tim Scott in his speech about wanting to get that police reform done. Maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel on that one aspect of it so far tonight.
I want to come back to Mario Parker, who covers the White House for us. And Mario, one of the things certainly Senator Tim Scott was talking about was the lack of bipartisanship. He kept saying common sense should lead to common ground. There's a lot of talk about bipartisanship, including from President Biden. Is it really substantively important to President Biden, or is it something of a magical incantation both sides use and they throw it around, but they never quite do it?
I think there's a little bit of both there, as is often the case with these type of things in Washington, D.C., right? I mean, President Biden is yearning for a type of Washington of yesteryear, right, where you can make these backroom deals, where you can kind of horse trade, if you will, where you can work together and work across the aisle. That's the Washington that he cut his teeth in. Whether or not that still remains the Washington here in 2021 is to be seen. President Biden seems to be making a concerted effort, at least, to invite Republicans to the White House, et cetera. You got Tim Scott, who also wants to get police reform done as well. But again, in Senator Scott's rebuttal, you saw some stark differences between he and President Biden.
Yeah, no question about it. And I also want to come back to Emily Wilkins, who covers Capitol Hill for us here, Emily. So what happens next? I mean, we had all of this language tonight from President Biden and from Senator Scott. What happens next?
Well, what happens next is that Congress gets to work on this legislation and what it actually looks like. I was watching President Biden as he was leaving the chamber. He stopped to talk to a number of lawmakers, among them House Ways and Means Chairman Richard Neal. He's the one who's going to be responsible for getting Biden's tax plan through the House, as well as Appropriations Chair Rosa DeLauro, who obviously controls all of the House spending, a really key figure in moving things. Both of those individuals are going to be the ones to start really writing what President Biden has proposed and turning that into actual detailed legislation. And that's what really everyone's watching and waiting for right now. Lawmakers are getting their requests in to leadership and to the president saying, hey, we'd like to have this aspect or that aspect included. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said she wants to see something done in the House by July 4th so it can then go over to the Senate and see what happens. The big question, I think, on a a lot of people's minds is any part of this, particularly the infrastructure part, done in a bipartisan manner, not done through budget reconciliation, or is everything put together in one big bill and tried to be passed through that budget reconciliation process that does not need any Republican to vote for it, so long as all Democrats are on board?
It would be only a mere $4 trillion or so, Jeannie. So, Jeannie, it's your job to wrap this all up. What do we know now that we didn't know two hours ago?
I think we know that Joe Biden has set the bar for himself and Democrats very, very high. To Emily's point, he's going to go out across the country, try to push for these plans. He's saying democracy can deliver. He's saying China is nipping at our heels, but he's got to then push this material through Congress. And as any president can tell him, that is a difficult thing to do, especially with a 50-50 Senate.
Yeah, well said. I really want to thank both Emily Wilkins and Mario Parker reporting for Bloomberg, and our special contributors, Jeannie Zaino of Iona College and Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital. That concludes our special coverage of President Biden's first address to a joint session of Congress. We will have more analysis of the president's tax plans tomorrow on Balance of Power, including interviews with Steve Ratner of Willett Advisors and Senator Rick Scott of Florida and Carrier CEO David Gitlin. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.